Hello everyone, and welcome to today's flipped lesson. Today we're going to be talking about chunking nonfiction. And to begin, I'd like to present the image of a pizza pie. The reason I give you this image is I want you to imagine something. Imagine someone picked up the entire pizza pie at once and tried to shove it into their mouth. Yeah, that probably wouldn't be the most effective way to eat a pizza. First off, they probably wouldn't even get much pizza in their mouth because most of it would end up on their face, and they might even get burned. Plus, people might start laughing at them because they're eating their pizza so weird. Well, most people don't just shove pizza into their face because it's not really effective. What they do instead is they eat their pizza slice by slice, like this. Suddenly, when it's eaten one slice at a time, it becomes a lot easier to digest and a lot easier to manage. Well, today we're going to be working on just that. No, we're not going to be eating pizza. What we are going to be working on is breaking our nonfiction reading into smaller pieces so that it's a little bit easier to understand. So if you could right now write down the following mini lesson in your reader's notebook. Strong readers chunk their nonfiction reading into smaller pieces to make it easier to understand. Now, in order to chunk our nonfiction articles, no, we're not going to use a pizza cutter, but we do have a few steps that we're going to follow. Here are the steps to chunking a nonfiction article. Number 1, identify a chunk and read it carefully. Number 2, locate the key details in the chunk. And finally, number 3, we're going to combine those details and decide what the chunk is mostly about. So, without further ado, let's get started. Now, looking at this article, it seems a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of writing there, and at first glance, you might think it's a little bit hard to understand. But don't forget what we talked about in the mini lesson. Today we are going to be chunking. So let's try this out and see if it works. Now, step 1 was to identify a chunk and read it carefully. So, for me it's pretty easy to find a chunk here because it's separated by clear paragraph breaks. So my first chunk will be right here. I'm just going to zoom in on it a little bit so that we could see it more clearly. Next, I am supposed to read it carefully, so I'm going to do that right now. Recently, some school boards recommended that all public schools should enforce a dress code. They declared that students in elementary, middle, and high school must wear uniforms every day. These boards also recommended that each school should decide its own style of uniform. Before a mandatory dress code can go into effect, it must be approved by the head of the city's school system. Already, this sensitive issue has caused an uproar. Okay, so I read it carefully. And now step 2 is to identify key details in this passage. As I was reading, a few details really struck me. The first one was right at the beginning of the chunk. Recently, some school boards recommended that all public schools should enforce a dress code. Well, that's a big deal. The next few sentences kind of just went into that in some more detail, so they're not overly important. But then the last line I got to really made me think. Already this sensitive issue has caused an uproar. So a lot of people are getting upset about this, and they're really arguing about it. So now what I want to do is combine all those details into what the chunk is mainly about. So I'm going to do that right here. This chunk is mostly about the recent recommendation for a dress code and how it has started a debate. So notice I've completed step 3 of my chunking, which is just to combine all the key details into what it's mostly about. So by following the 3 steps, I have now successfully chunked the first piece of this article. So far, so good. Now, just so you can see this done one more time, I'm also going to do the second chunk. except this time the steps should be a little bit easier. So step 1, locate a chunk. Got it. Next, I want to read it very carefully. Once again, I'll zoom in. Many people call for a dress code. On first glance, their reasons appear very logical. They point to the inappropriate clothes that so many kids wear to school today. Bare midriffs and low skirts, vulgar t-shirts, baggy jeans. These clothes supposedly prevent students from focusing on their work. Those in favor of a dress code say school uniforms will allow students to concentrate on their studies instead of on their fashions. Also, if everyone is wearing the same style, individuals won't be teased for wearing less flashy fashions. These people claim that discipline in school will improve thanks to a dress code. Good, so I read it carefully, and now the second step is to find key details. Well, there were a bunch of details that I thought were really important in this piece. First is that there are all these people out there that are calling for a dress code. Next, I noticed that those in favor of a dress code say that school uniforms will allow students to concentrate on their studies instead of on their fashions. That's a very important point. The next thing I noticed was that these people claim that discipline in school will also improve thanks to a dress code. So here I noticed that there were a lot of details that all were kind of talking about these benefits of a dress code. And notice how each detail I highlighted started off with many people call for a dress code. Those in favor of a dress code say. These people claim. So I'm noticing that if I combine all these details in my third step, this chunk is mainly about why some people say a dress code is a good thing. So once again, you see, by following the 3 easy steps of chunking, how I was able to take a chunk from that nonfiction article and turn it into a very simple main idea. Now, I have 2 down, and it looks like I have about 2 to go, except I'm not going to do any more. Now, it's your turn. So, I'm going to do the first part for you and highlight the chunk I'd like you to work on. However, that's where it stops. So now, what you're going to do is you're going to read this chunk very carefully to finish off step 1. Then step 2, you are going to identify all the key details. And then step 3, you are going to combine those key details just as I did so that you can find the overall main idea of that chunk. You must bring in that work with you tomorrow to class, because at the beginning of class, I'm going to walk around and check that everybody has it done. Now, if you have any other questions about anything in this lesson, or questions about chunking in general, please bring those to class tomorrow and I will address them right away. If you have questions about the pizza at the beginning or are feeling a little bit hungry, well, honestly, that's probably something you want to address with your parents, because I'm not exactly the authority on feeding you. That's a little off topic, but the point is that you should get this work done right now and bring it in tomorrow. Have a great night and happy chunking.